My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I work with a disability rights group here in Austin and in the state and nationally called ADAPT, and we work on disability rights. And I wanted to start out by saying that in contrast to one of the earlier speakers, I was really glad to see the title for this being Feminist Family Values, because I think that the right wing has tried to monopolize the term, and they've tried to steal that from the rest of our society, and that they're working very hard to narrow the focus on all kinds of things and to keep the view of who's allowed to be as thin and as possible. And I think that the only way that we can fight that is by taking back these kind of terms, taking back the idea that family includes us. And if I had one goal for the feminist movement in the future, it would be to broaden its view of feminism. If you look around us here and the panel and the people beside you in the audience, you'll see that there are many other people here than the traditional white, middle-class, able-bodied woman who feminism is so often equated with. And only if we cast a wide net are we going to be able to win this fight. I came to talk about women with disabilities and feminism and the many parallels between the goals of those two movements and the ways that it can be fought, and ways that you could look at many issues and see that they have a disability part of them. And I wanted to talk about family values and disability issues like reproductive rights, when so many women with disabilities are sterilized because we wouldn't want those kind of people reproducing. Economic rights, where African American disabled women make 12 cents to the dollar that white able-bodied men make, and the 75% unemployment rate among people with disabilities, domestic partnerships, which are strained for people with disabilities when you get benefits from the government, which is what you kind of have to live on if you can't get a job. You economically cannot afford to get married because you will lose at least a third of your benefits. Gangs, where we always hear about people being killed by gangs. Well, everybody doesn't die. What happens to the rest of them? A lot of them become disabled people. And I could go on and on. It's a very, very big topic, but I have to talk about one other issue first, because it still is a very big issue, and it's fundamental to having people with disabilities involved in any other movement. It's the issue of accessibility. I'm really tired of talking about it, frankly, but it continues to be an issue. If you don't have access, people with disabilities cannot be part of what's going on. And I mean, I think the thing with the lift earlier is an example of that. An interpreter is not here so that if deaf people want to watch or hear, they wouldn't be able to know what we're talking about, and we wouldn't know what they were talking about, because a lot of these accommodations are not one-way streets, they're two-way streets. Access is a civil right. People have gone to jail for that right, including myself, and will go again if we have to. And the women's movement is not exempt from that either. And when groups like Planned Parenthood talk about how they don't have to have their clinics accessible because their program's accessible and you can go across town to this other clinic and go there, that's wrong. And when they tell things like they told a friend of mine with cerebral palsy that why was she there at their clinic, why would she need birth control? That's wrong. Access is not a frill, it's a fundamental issue. And if you don't have access, women with disabilities are not going to be part of other things that are going on. The main issue that the group that I work with is long-term care and getting more community-based services so that people don't have to be locked away in nursing homes and other institutions to get the support services that they need. Something that I hope you already realize, but I want to make plain in case you don't, is that this is a women's issue if ever there was one. 75% of the people in nursing homes or who are warehoused there are women, especially older women. Over 60% of the primary paid caretakers for, whether it's attendants or aides in nursing homes or whatever, they're women. And I would venture to say over 90% of the unpaid caregivers are the mothers, daughters, and wives that do this work. They're all women. It's a women's issue. And if you wonder why it gets such low priority in the federal government and in our society, think about the fact that it's really a women's issue. There's a very, very strong institutional bias in the current support services that our country has in what they call the long-term care services. We spend 6 times as much money on institutionalizing people in nursing homes and quote-unquote state schools, which are schools you never graduate from. I think you're supposed to learn how to be a non-disabled person there. So of course you can't ever win that fight. Anyway, we spend 6 times as much on institutions as we spend on community-based services. And every state that gets Medicaid is required to have a nursing home program. There is no requirement for community-based services. That's an option that the states can choose or not choose as they see fit. The lives of people with disabilities are basically not valued, and I think that's something that feminism has looked at quite a bit. And if you look now at the Medicaid debate that's going on in D.C., you'll see a very sad thing. I mean, you'll see the Republicans wanting to cut, and turn things back to the states that when it went to the federal government because it wasn't being taken care of right in the first place. And the Democrats are just fear-mongering about all the poor souls that are going to have to leave nursing homes. Nobody's willing to look up and have the vision that maybe people could live in their own homes for less money, which is what would happen. Managed care is basically the idea of managing people out with disabilities out of the whole system. And the ultimate expression of that is coming up really lately with Dr. Kevorkian. The one right that people with disabilities are promoted as having is the right to die. Physician-assisted suicide is the ultimate expression of this attitude. And to the disability community, it looks like genocide. Many people think of it as a personal control issue. Well, it's not. Wake up. It's not. These patients that he's killing and other people are killing, they're supposed to be terminal. Life is terminal. We're all terminal. Those people are people with disabilities, and there's no looking at why they might be wanting to kill themselves, looking at counseling. This has gone on for a very long time, and you should look at the issue straight on about what it really is. The real message of the whole thing is it's better to be dead than disabled. And the fact of the matter is these people are not being prevented from committing suicide. That's not really the issue. They want somebody else to kill them, and we want them to have that right. In your work of feminist family values, you need to think wide and work wide. And I want to just end with a thought that a younger woman that I work with and I were talking about last week. So often, people with disabilities and people in general are looking to someone else to figure out what to do and to lead the way and solve the problems. Well, we are the source of the solutions, and we must look to ourselves for those answers.
My name is Deanne Anders, and I am privileged to work for Pam Wilhoit and the Texas Council on Family Violence. I'm an advocate for battered women and their children. I'm also an activist in the Democratic Party, dysfunctional as it is. Just some observations from some of the work that I've done and some of the work I continue to do. December the 3rd, I'll be 50 years old, and I want you all to know that I'm tired. I have been a soldier on the war on poverty. I have done peace marches. I have done civil rights marches. I was a soldier in the sexual revolution. I'm tired of fighting these things. There was a time in my life when I thought that we had done Roe v. Wade and that was settled. I was wrong. It's 1996 and I still send money and go to marches to get the minimum wage up to $5.25 an hour. I work every day to ensure that children who live in homes where violence is everywhere, when the divorce comes, they're not sent to go live with a batterer. Folks, there's something wrong with this picture. There's something wrong when year after year, day after day, the same set of people fight the same problems year after year after year after year. I would present to you the suggestion this afternoon that all these problems that we have are class-based. I would present to you this afternoon the suggestion that all these problems that we have are class-based. Once the dominant paragon can divide us up by race, the victory is theirs. That is what they have done. You can take whatever issue you want and claim it as yours, but when you peel it back and you look down at it, the problem is all this division is done by class. If you're at the top, fine. If you're at the bottom, that's just too damn bad. Your challenge is to get to the top. And what they will do is maybe for every 6 that are trying, they'll let 1 get up. And so they have another division. The problem is not that you should worry about your size of the pie. The problem is you should worry about how big the pie is. You know, you need to make the pie bigger. We went to a meeting a couple weeks ago, actually to a lecture, and we're honored to get to hear Elie Wiesel. He told a story, and I will share that story with you. A young man lives in a rural area, and people begin to talk that this man has many gifts. This young man has many gifts, that he can predict the future, that he can read minds, that he's kind of a soothsayer of sorts. So he's brought before the king, and the king says to him, "Is that true? Can you read my mind? Can you predict the future?" The young man says, "Well, maybe I can, maybe not." The king says, "Is it true?" The young man says, "Well, sometimes I can." The king says to him, "Tell me about the bird in my hand behind my back. Is the bird dead or is the bird alive?" The young man thinks, "Now what am I supposed to say?" He says to the king, "Sire, you have the answer to that question in your hand. That is the situation that we are in today. You will have to fight these problems today, tomorrow, and next week. But I suggest to you that it's this great honor and this great privilege to get to do this." Thanks.
My name is Annabel Burleson. I also work for the Texas Council on Family Violence. I'm the program director of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm a single mom. And even though I was married and stayed in that marriage for 6 more years, I've been a single mom ever since the day my son was born. My now ex-husband was always very proud of the fact that he never changed a diaper or fixed a bottle or did took any part in nurturing our child. Everyone, men, women, and children, deserves and has the right as a human being to live in a safe home. Our homes should not be more dangerous than the streets. We all have the human right, the civil right, to feel safe and secure when we're inside our homes. And battered women and children do not get that. That right is taken away from them. In the family values of the mainstream, we hear a lot about how much children need to have 2 parents, how much children need to have their father too. Well, that's just not always true. When one of the parents, no matter what their gender is violent and abusive, they lose their rights as a parent. And they are destroying that home, and they are continuing the cycle of domestic violence for those children. Nurturing of children does not include abuse, whether that abuse is physical, verbal, or mental. And the witnessing of abuse of any kind is also a form of abuse. And many people, including many battered women, believe that the children in a violent home are protected from that abuse, that they don't see it, that they don't know about it, because the children are sent to their room when a fight begins. But children in a violent home know exactly what's going on. They don't have to see it and they don't have to hear it. They know it's there and they're affected by it. And sometimes one of the parents needs to be removed from the home and even removed from the family. And one of the problems that battered women face is our judicial system. Our judicial system, which is based on patriarchy. And our judicial system, which does not take into account so many times the effects of the violence and abuse that are going on in a home, and falls back onto the old argument that children need two parents. These children need to have their father. And the answer to this problem is not to get more women judges, because I've seen just as many cases, sometimes some of the worst ones, and I look at Deanne because we've seen a lot of these where a woman judge makes some pretty terrible decisions in a child's life. But our judicial system needs to change. Even though every year, every couple of years, those of us in the battered women's movement work very hard to get new laws and to make changes in old laws. But the judicial system continues to ignore the fact that violence needs to be taken into account when considering custody and visitation issues. And our judicial system and our entire society needs to stop blaming the victims. Stop blaming the women and children who are being beaten and abused for the violence that happens to them. Women and children don't lie about this. There's a myth out there that women and children lie about abuse in order to get something. I'm not sure what. Women and children have no reason to lie about the abuse that happens in their lives, often on a daily basis. Another problem that faces battered women is access to services. There's many communities that don't have domestic violence shelters or programs where battered women and their children can go. And even in communities where those services are available, the doors are often closed on the basis of race or language or chemical dependency or all kinds of disabilities. And there is no access to services for many women and children because of all those different issues. Now, about over 2 years ago, the Texas Council on Family Violence recognized the need to make it easier to access services for women, or at least to help them find what's out there. And for that reason, we started working on developing a national hotline. The National Domestic Violence Hotline opened just this year in February. And we are helping to fill that need and at least to help women identify where the services are in their community. But we're already getting the calls back from women who say, I have a chemical dependency problem and I can't go to that shelter. Or I can't go to that shelter because no one there speaks my language. Or I'm a deaf woman and there's no one there to help interpret for me. Or I have some kind of a disability and I can't get in the door. I physically can't get in the door. So we need to address the issues of accessibility to those services for all battered women and their children. And I believe that every woman who leaves a batterer, who calls a hotline, who steps into a shelter, joins our revolution and joins our movements, both the battered women's movement and the feminist movement, whether she knows it or not, whether she names it or not. She has joined us, and we need to welcome her with open arms. And I also challenge you to remember that domestic violence is everybody's business. Get involved.
Hi, I want to take a moment to honor everyone who's spoken before me, and I look forward to what others have to say. My name is Moira Dollan. I'm a physician here in Austin. I'm also a writer and single parent, cyclist, take care of a couple of dogs, and try to have garden parties as much as possible, but I'm here today in my capacities as dreamer and activist. Coming public with some of the strange things that go on in my private world is brand new for me, and I appreciate your attendance and all these other women who are likewise speaking out. I'm going to continue the discussion of violence. I'm going to talk to you about a global epidemic. The global epidemic I'm talking about is not AIDS or hantavirus or dengue fever or even Ebola. I'm talking to you about the epidemic that underlies all of that, is the reason for those diseases and many other, including cancer. That's the epidemic of violence, of competition, of war, all born of fear. When we look at how this all developed, we notice that we're in a patriarchal society and have been for a long time. We notice that our mechanisms to fight epidemics and disease are immunity. It's very interesting that immunity comes from a Greek word whose dictionary definition is exempt from public service. And I propose to you that the reason our immune systems are no longer working is because they never worked. Because we are globally in a furious race to boost immunity, to escape from public service. What we are seeing is the global emergence of antibiotic resistance among bacteria, new virulent forms of parasites, HIV that we can't even test for, dengue fever now in mainland United States. It's not just a third world problem anymore. Multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, killing even people with so-called competent immune systems. To shed some light on this whole question of immunity, I want to tell you how we discuss this in the scientific medical world. When someone is challenged with a virus, let's say, we talk about mounting an immune response. The mechanisms of our biological defense being the release of killer T cells, interferon. This sounds like a script that was written by the Pentagon. Is it any wonder that in our patriarchal society, we found interferon and killer T cells in this so-called immune system, these defense mechanisms? Maybe, just maybe, we find what we look for. And today I propose to you that we look for something else. My meditations have been showing me an alternate model. Community. And what I am literally seeing is DNA, our genetic material, unwinding from its double helix, including viral particles, the genetic material from viruses, and winding back up again. This is an inclusionary model. This is a feminist model. We can't even make a vaccine against the AIDS virus because it mutates so frequently, even within one person's body, not to mention among people and across borders. Our immune systems are not keeping up. We see it globally in the environmental tragedies. We see it in our dysfunctional communities. We see it in our poor excuses that pass for families. And we see it on a biochemical level. Immunity doesn't work, and it never has worked. I'm talking about community. Bacteria, we find over 90% of cases of bacteria that have developed antibiotic resistance do so by plasmid mechanisms. Plasmid is a little scrap of genetic material from a virus. And the way that bacteria becomes antibiotic resistant, the way it improves its survival, is by including a little bit of genetic material from a virus. That viral genetic material, now included in the bacteria's gene, codes for antibiotic resistance. This is what we need to do. We need to have an inclusionary model. And I invite every single one of you to specific guided DNA rearrangement meditations to develop new genetic material on the model of community. We do not need to continue protecting each other from our bodily fluids. We need to promote the development of a deep feminist model at the subcellular level. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shanda Gator, and I'm a longtime affiliated with Planned Parenthood and other great, important liberation movements that I pride myself in being a part of. I certainly don't remember hearing feminist used in my household when I was younger, but the first time I remember hearing it, I remember instantly thinking of my mother and all the great work that she's done, and that she's always been a feminist. And she's never told me stories about marching or going to jail or any of these other things, and she certainly doesn't have stories to tell me about who that she went to see and they spoke and blah, 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 blah. But she has always worked hard, and she's always been a stronghold for me, and I certainly stand on her shoulders and I'm ready to move on. But the one thing I've always noticed is how she keeps it on an everyday level, and that's what I wanted to talk about, is the division that's been placed in feminism, whether we look at all these little separate things that are so not important, whether somebody shaves their legs or how somebody cuts their hair or if they're wearing makeup and blah, 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 all just this list that's endless and just gets longer. But we're all women, and if you're a feminist, yes, you're for a movement, but you're in love with women, and that's what you're working for. So it's good to remember that. And I was thinking a solution, because that's what I remember hearing foremost when Carol asked me to talk, was a solution. And I was like, I can think of 18 problems, but I am having a little trouble thinking of a solution today. But I do have one, and it seems small, and I'm asking you to start small, but I certainly want you to start appreciating the women around you and the good work that they do. And start with your mom. Moms are such funny things, because sometimes you like to think they're not feminists. They didn't do blah, blah. They did everything. They worked hard and they raised you, and that's hard work. And start there, start appreciating what they do. Sometimes I drop in on my mom just to help her out at her classroom, and I'm just amazed. This brilliant woman, she's working with children, this is perfect, you know? And I have to remember that. Start with your sisters, start with your daughters, start with your coworkers. Your coworkers are so important. That competition sits right in there, and you start thinking about your coworker that's a woman, and you're like, but no, start appreciating them for what they're doing. They're working hard too. And every woman's a feminist. We certainly all want to be close, and this movement stays so stagnant just around us being divided. And just because we're not moving doesn't mean other organizations who may not have the same agenda aren't. They're certainly moving. So we're going to have to come together again, and that's a decision. It wasn't a decision for us to be divided, but it's a decision for us to come together again and for us to appreciate each other and support each other. And I think that that's all I really want to say. But I certainly think that to start it today. Start with the women that are around you, sitting next to you. Start with the people that spoke because they did wonderful. And start as soon as you go home. Start when you go in the workplace on Monday, because that's where it's all going to come down to, is women having support from other women to come closer to other women. Thank you.
I think the timer thing will work for me if you start from 5 and go back to 1. It's just the way my brain works. Okay. My name is Carol Joseph. I'm a local social worker at an alternative school. I'm a mother of a 17-year-old daughter. I am of Arab heritage. Let's see, what else? I'm a veteran of the United States Army, which is how I became a social worker, because if I hadn't had the GI Bill, I never would have ever even thought about going to school. And I think I want to just say something about what you said, Shanda, and that is that I feel deeply privileged and inspired by everything that every woman has said here. And I think that it's a privilege for every one of us who's in this room today, even that we get to be here, that we can look around and there are hundreds of empty seats in this room. That if it weren't for classism, and I agree with you that it's at the root, if it weren't for economic exploitation, that there are enough feminists in this city to fill every seat in here and more. That the women who right now, while we're here, 8 to 5 jobs, the women who are at their work and who would love to be inspired by other women can't be here because they can't leave their job today. They won't. They need that money, even as little as it usually is. They need that money to survive. And for each one of us to be here, we do have a certain amount of privilege. And I encourage everyone to be thankful, to gain whatever privilege you can, and to use every little bit of it that you eke out of this system to fight for privileges for other women. I think the next thing that I want to say is that I recently have been in a process of returning to the Catholic Church. And it's been very interesting to see the reactions of friends of mine who are feminists and who know me as a feminist. It's kind of like, now why would you do that, Carol? Why? Think about this. Why would you do that? And the funny thing about it is that the nun who is teaching the class that I'm taking, Sister Agnes, who I love deeply, is a feminist. And I asked her, how can you be a feminist and be in the Catholic Church? And she said, there are many things that are wrong with the church. People are human, but this is my home, and no one's going to kick me out of my home. And I think that that's kind of the way, that's a really good approach to take as a feminist, that everything is our home. We get to be wherever we want to be. We get to be where our roots were and go back to them, and that's our home. We get to explore new things in the world and other opportunities, and that's our home. And we get to take all of the wonderful things that we get to experience and find ways so that people, women and men, who have not gotten those opportunities, get them. And part of my preparation for this was the idea that, okay, I have to be thinking of ideas for how to do that. One of the things is that I think that as feminists, we need to be involved in unions. We need to either join unions, start unions, support women and men who are in unions, do whatever it takes so that workers in our country are fairly compensated for the work they do, that they have opportunities to come to things like this in the day. And the more that workers are organized, the more that we're able to fight for those rights. I know that I was in Beijing for the women's conference, and one thing I noticed about women from other countries is that the women's movement is not separate from labor movements in other countries the way it is here. That we have, as a part of the way oppression works in this country, we see it as separate issues. Basically, we've been taught those are separate issues. They're not separate at all. The fight for seeing that people are treated fairly and justly in their workplaces is the fight for women's rights. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shakti Miller, and I'm a natural health practitioner. I've been in private practice for about 20 years in Texas. And as I've been thinking over what I've heard today and what I've been thinking about as I was preparing my thoughts, one of the things that I want to say is that health really is a feminist issue. If you think about that your bodies are being assaulted, it becomes more and more apparent that we need to bond together and get information out and better choices out so that we become masters of the bodies that we live in. I grew up in a household with a mother who is a nurse, a public health nurse whose specialty was maternal and child health. So that was something that was just part of my environment. And one of the things I remember her talking about was how difficult it was to be a nurse and be subservient to the male doctors. And when it came time for me to choose to go to school, everything in my life was lined up to go and become a nurse, and I couldn't do it. I could not be a person to do injections. It did not seem right to me. It seemed violent. And without knowing it, over the course of the next 10 years or so, as I studied anthropology and world religions, I began to come up with my own ideas that have taken maybe another 20 years to formulate. And that's a part of what I want to share with you today. It seems to me that the challenge facing all of us is to come up with a new paradigm. We live in a paradigm that is based on Newtonian physics that says we're all separate. It's a very mechanistic view. It's like a clockwork view where there are different pieces, but they're not related to each other. This is not true, and it's causing us to die. What we need is a new paradigm that supports life, that supports interconnectedness, that is a feminine perspective. What is missing from the world for the last, take a pick, 3,000 years is feminine energy. Feminine energy has to do with cooperation. It has to do with power from within. It has to do with partnership. It has to do with long-term goals for the collective benefit. And one of the things that I've learned is that this is how we need to think about our bodies. We need to work, as you already said, from a model that says we can cooperate with this system instead of suppressing it, instead of having power over and domination and control. And I invite you to think about what that would be like if we were raising children with the idea that they could take care of their bodies and keep them healthy and happy from a model of cooperation with their systems. This feminine energy has to do with nurturing, intuition, support, collective goals for the long-term good, connection to spirit, and co-creativeship with the life force. We are all facing extinction on this planet. We are killing the planet, and the planet is killing us. It's not very nice to talk about, but I don't know. Most people I talk to these days, if they really tell you the truth, really fear degenerative disease. It's something that we live with, it's become common, and it shouldn't be that way. We have infection, we have parasites, we have toxic chemicals, and we have toxic emotions, and we don't know what to do about them. And one of the reasons why we don't know what to do about them is because the information is suppressed. It is against the law to tell people what will help them heal themselves. Doesn't that seem strange? And doesn't it seem strange that is that something that women have done for millennia, naturally, is be healers, lay their hands on people, talk to them, give them herbs? This is natural, and it's suppressed. We aren't, by law, allowed to tell each other, unless it's our personal experience, what will work. I think that needs to change. I think that's part of a paradigm that says we need power and control over the masses, and it's what stops people from having power within to heal themselves and each other. I want to talk specifically about some things that concern me very much right now. The fluoride in your water suppresses thyroid function, causes the immune system to not work well, the metabolism to not work well, causes people to be depressed and be overweight. Chlorine that's in our water has been shown to cause breast and prostate cancer. If you're not using water filters, I encourage you to. Why is this kind of information not out there? Why don't we know these things? And if we do know them, why can't we organize to do something about them? Parasites are now rampant in our water supply. It's common knowledge. Some of them cause a lot of problems. Specifically, there's a triad between fungus, viruses, and parasites that contributes to cancer. It's in our water. That should be supporting our life, and it's not. It's supporting illness. I want to tell you one last thing, because my time's up, that I think is just critical that we know about. There's actually two things, and I'll do it quick. One is that there is now a new test that you can do that's called the AMIS test. It's a blood test that you no longer need mammograms. As you may know, mammograms are using radiation, and radiation causes cancer. There's a book out in the lobby full of research done from the symposium the foundation had a little while ago about the effects of radiation and cancer. We need to be aware of it. We need to do something about it. In addition, there's a whole new class of natural medicines going to be allowed within the next year called nutraceuticals. We're going to start to have some choices that are natural about how to take care of ourselves to empower us and each other. And if you want to know about either of those two things, you can find me later and I'll be happy to share. To me, anything we can do to avoid the status quo that's killing our bodies is empowering, and we owe it to ourselves and our children and our future generations to take up this challenge and take the responsibility to get informed and save each other and the planet.